Hi, I'm Eva. That's what I said when I first laid eyes on Mark at a mutual friend's party. Dressed in a crisp suit, he looked like something out of a magazine, a stark contrast to the slightly shabby, casual gathering around us. Mark, he replied, extending his hand for a firm shake that somehow felt different, like destiny wrapped in a social nicety. From the moment we met, there was this magnetic pull between us. The way he looked into my eyes made me feel as though I was the only woman in the room, in the world even. We talked about everything, movies, politics, even existential crises, all in one night. When he dropped me home, he leaned in and kissed me softly. That was the moment I knew I had found the one. Our dating period was nothing short of magical. Mark was chivalrous, thoughtful, and incredibly supportive. We laughed together, cried together, and most importantly, dreamed together. And so, it wasn't long before we decided to get married. "You make me want to be a better man, Eva," he told me one evening, his eyes looking earnestly into mine. "And you make me believe in love stories," I responded, my eyes welling up. The wedding itself was surreal, a picturesque setting by the lake with fairy lights twinkling as we said our vows. We danced our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and I remember feeling as if we were floating on air. Around this time, I was introduced to Michelle, Mark's sister. At our wedding, she wore a dress that was inexplicably extravagant for an event that wasn't about her. Our first conversation was, let's just say, interesting. "So, you're the girl who finally managed to tie down my brother," she said, her voice dripping with some emotion I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, I guess I am," I replied, trying to maintain my composure and my smile. "He's quite the catch, you know. I hope you're good for him," Michael added before drifting away to mingle with other guests. Her words struck me as odd, but I pushed that feeling aside. After all, weddings can be stressful and emotions run high. I didn't want to make any snap judgments. Mark simply brushed it off. "She's always been a bit different, but she's family. You'll get used to her," he said. We were madly in love, or at least that's what I believed. After the wedding, we went on an idyllic honeymoon to Bali, and that's where we made plans for our future. Our house, our potential kids, our life together. Returning from our honeymoon, reality greeted us, but it wasn't harsh. It was filled with promise. I was progressing well in my marketing career, while Mark had lost his job a few months before the wedding and was on unemployment benefits. I didn't mind being the primary earner. Love was what mattered most, and we had plenty of that. Or so I thought. We pooled our resources and even managed to buy a house. A charming 3-bedroom cottage-style home that we both fell in love with at first sight. It was the perfect start to what I envisioned as our perfect life together. But as they say, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But those revelations came later. At this point, our life felt like a series of beautiful moments stitched together by love and shared dreams. If only I knew how quickly dreams could turn into nightmares. Michelle began visiting us frequently after we settled into our new home. At first, I was optimistic about getting to know her better. I remember inviting her over for dinner, thinking that a homemade meal would be a good way to bond. I spent hours in the kitchen, hoping to impress her with my culinary skills. "How's everything going here?" Mark asked, walking into the kitchen while I was setting the table. "I think I've outdone myself with the beef stew," I said, smiling. "I really want Michelle to feel welcomed." "She'll love it, babe," Mark assured me, giving me a peck on the cheek. When Michelle arrived, she walked into our home with a peculiar air, as if she was entering a place beneath her. Her eyes scrutinized every piece of decor, every choice we'd made to make this house our home. "Dinner's ready," I announced, hoping to steer the attention to the meal. We sat down to eat, and Michelle took her first spoonful of stew. She chewed slowly, deliberately, then put her spoon down. "It's interesting," she finally said in a tone that suggested otherwise. "Interesting good or interesting bad?" I asked, trying to keep the atmosphere light. "Oh, it's just different," she said, avoiding eye contact. Mark chimed in. "Eva spent all day making it. It's one of my favorites." "That's sweet," Michelle said, her voice as cold as ice. The visits continued, and each one felt like a veiled character assassination. Michelle would make snide comments about everything from my career choices to the color schemes of our house. One time she even criticized the way I laughed. "Do you always laugh like that? It's so unique," she said, emphasizing the last word as though it were a curse. I looked to Mark for support, but he just shrugged. "She's just being Michelle," he told me, as if that was some kind of explanation. One evening, while we were watching a movie, Michelle openly questioned our financial arrangements. "Isn't it emasculating, Mark, to have your wife be the breadwinner while you're living off unemployment benefits?" Mark laughed it off. "In this economy, I consider myself lucky to have such a successful wife." "It must be convenient for you," she retorted, looking at me as though I was part of some grand scheme to demean her brother. Again, Mark did nothing to defend me. "Oh, Michelle, always the joker," he said, but his words fell flat. I was beginning to feel not just unwelcome in Michelle's world, but also in my own home. She had a way of making me feel like an intruder, an imposter in my own life. And what's worse was that Mark allowed it, enabled it even. Each visit from Michelle added layers to an invisible wall I sensed was building between Mark and me. I took my concerns to Mark, hoping for some reassurance. "Don't you think Michelle is a bit harsh? It feels like she's going out of her way to make me uncomfortable." "She's family, Eva," Mark sighed. "We don't have to like our family all the time, but we do have to tolerate them. You'll get used to her." I wanted to believe Mark. I wanted to believe that this was just an adjustment period. But deep down, I had a nagging feeling that Michelle was not the kind of person one simply got used to. The dynamic was troubling, but little did I know, it was a foreshadowing of even darker days to come. My life took a nightmarish turn one evening while I was at work. I remember looking at the clock. It was almost time to pack up and head home. That's when my phone buzzed. Seeing Mom flash on the screen, I immediately felt a mixture of excitement and concern. She rarely called me during work hours unless it was important. "Hey, Mom. Is everything okay?" I answered, sensing that this wasn't just a casual call. There was a noticeable pause on the other end, then a deep sigh. "Eva, I've got some bad news. The doctors say I'm very sick, and well, I don't have much time left. Maybe a month?" I felt my heart plummet into my stomach. I couldn't formulate words. All I could muster was a choked sob. "Ava, are you there?" My mother's weak voice echoed in my ears. "Yes, Mom, I'm here," I stammered, my mind racing as I tried to process the devastating news. "I'll be there as soon as I can." I left work immediately, my thoughts a chaotic jumble as I drove home. How could this happen? Just like that, the doctor gives a timeline and everything changes. My mother was my rock, my foundation. The thought of losing her was unimaginable. I walked into the house to find Mark and Michelle sitting in the living room, laughing about something trivial. They both looked up as I entered, their smiles fading as they took in my tear-streaked face. "What happened?" Mark asked, concern coloring his voice. I took a deep breath before recounting the grim news. "My mom is very sick. She doesn't have much time left. I need to go see her." Michelle rolled her eyes. "That's unfortunate, but life happens." Mark looked at me, his eyes searching my face. I'm sorry, Eva, but we have Michelle's wedding in 2 weeks. I can't let you go right now. The room seemed to spin around me. You can't let me go, I repeated, my voice tinged with disbelief. My mother is dying. We'll Skype into the funeral or something, Michelle interjected, as if that would somehow make it better. I looked from Michelle to Mark, my heart sinking as I realized he wasn't going to stand up for me, not even now. If you don't go to my sister's wedding, consider our marriage over, he said, his voice cold and final. The audacity of his words left me dumbfounded. I was at a crossroads, forced to choose between my dying mother and a husband who, it seemed, had little regard for my feelings. A storm of emotion raged inside me, but I had to appear calm, at least for now. All right, I said quietly, I'll go to the wedding. They both looked satisfied, as if they'd won some kind of battle. But little did they know, they'd just ignited a war. As they returned to their laughter and idle chatter, my mind began to formulate a plan. If Mark was forcing me to choose, then I would make a choice, one that would sever these toxic ties once and for all. I spent the next 2 weeks in a daze, going through the motions of life but feeling utterly detached. I talked to my mom every day, hearing her voice grow weaker with each call, while feeling a growing resentment towards Mark and Michelle. They went about their wedding preparations with great enthusiasm, as though my world hadn't just crumbled around me. I was meticulous in my pretense, however. I attended dress fittings for the wedding, helped select floral arrangements, and even participated in planning the bridal shower. But behind the smiles and cooperative facade, a plan was taking shape in my mind, a plan fueled by both love for my mother and anger at the people who were obstructing me from saying a proper goodbye to her. It was a Thursday night, exactly 2 days before the wedding, when Mark confronted me in our bedroom. So, I've been thinking, and I want to make sure you're fully committed to being at the wedding, he said, eyeing me suspiciously. I already said I would go, didn't I? I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, but you've been distant, and I want to hear you say that you're committed to this family, he demanded, as if my commitment was in question here. Is that an ultimatum? I asked incredulously. Yes, it is, he responded without missing a beat. If you're not at that wedding, we're done. I'll divorce you, and you can say goodbye to this house and our life together. I felt my blood boil, but I couldn't afford to lose my cool. Not when I was this close to executing my plan. Fine, Mark. I'm committed to being at the wedding, I said, gritting my teeth as I forced the words out. He looked satisfied, a smug smile spreading across his face. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. Little did he know, his ultimatum had just solidified my resolve. It was shocking how easy it was to book a last-minute one-way ticket to my mom's city for the day of Michelle's wedding. It felt like the universe itself was aiding and abetting my plan. The night before my departure, I couldn't sleep. While Mark snored next to me, I got up and started sifting through his belongings. Suits, shirts, shoes, anything he would need for the wedding. I piled it up on the bed and then methodically started to cut, shred, and effectively ruin each item. When I was done, I felt a curious mixture of exhilaration and sadness. Exhilaration because I had taken a tangible step in reclaiming my life, and sadness for the love that I had once thought would be my forever. Before the sun came up, I packed a bag with my essentials, called a cab, and left the house that was no longer a home to me. As I sat in the cab, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me, a sharp contrast to the oppressive atmosphere I had left behind. I was going to see my mother, and no ultimatum could stop me now. The cab ride to the airport felt like an escape. Each mile that widened the distance between the home I had shared with Mark and me seemed like a tiny piece of freedom regained. I looked out of the window watching the streets blur, trying to make peace with the decision I had just made. I had a few moments of doubt, of course. Was I being too harsh? Was the marriage truly beyond salvaging? But each time such thoughts surfaced, I remembered my mother's frail voice on the phone, her time running out like grains in an hourglass. That silenced any second guessing. My phone started vibrating just as I was checking in at the airport. It was Mark. I sent it to voicemail. He called again, and again. Each time I silenced it, a sense of empowerment grew within me. I had allowed him to control the narrative of our relationship for so long, and here I was, seizing it back. Once I had passed security and was sitting at the gate, I finally allowed myself to listen to his voicemails. The first one was filled with confusion, the second with anger, and by the third, he was outright yelling. "Eva, where are you? I can't believe you do this. You've ruined everything. Do you hear me, everything? Don't bother coming back. I'll have divorce papers ready." I felt a lump in my throat but swallowed hard. It was time to call him back. As I dialed, my hands trembled, but my resolve was like steel. He picked up almost immediately. "Where the hell are you?" he screamed into the phone. "I'm where I should have been the moment I found out about my mother. I'm on my way to see her," I said, my voice calm yet firm. "You've ruined the wedding. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. I'll make sure you regret this, Eva." "I regret a lot of things, Mark," I replied, "but being with my dying mother won't be one of them. As for the wedding, you and Michelle made your priorities clear. Now I'm making mine." "You're going to lose everything," he seethed. "The house, the car, our friends." "Sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain something worthwhile," I said. "I'm going to be with my mother, something you should have supported from the beginning." And with that, I hung up, turned off my phone, and boarded the plane. As it lifted off, soaring into the sky, I felt an odd mixture of grief and liberation. My mother was dying, and a part of me was breaking, but for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I landed and went straight to the hospital. The sight of my mother, frail and tired but smiling at the sight of me, made every sacrifice worthwhile. We hugged, tears flowing freely from both of us, and in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I was where I needed to be, not just physically, but emotionally and morally as well. In that hospital room, I found something that had been missing for a long time. A sense of peace. And as I sat there holding my mother's hand, I realized this was just the first step in reclaiming my life. Mark's threats of divorce and losing the house seemed inconsequential. After all, what is a house without love or a marriage without respect? My mother's impending departure reminded me of the transience of life and the importance of living it authentically. It was time for new beginnings, no matter what that entailed. The days following my arrival were a heartbreaking blur. My mother's condition deteriorated rapidly, but she held on, seemingly buoyed by my presence. We spent the time reminiscing, crying, and even laughing. It was painful but precious. A final chapter we wrote together in the story of our relationship. One evening, I received an email notification on my phone. It was from Mark's email address, but the subject line said legal documents. Divorce proceedings. So he was really going through with it. Before I could open the email, my mother spoke up. "Eva, you don't have to go through that now. You have enough on your plate." "But I do, Mom," I said softly. "I need to know what I'm coming back to." I opened the email and quickly scanned through the documents. Mark was indeed filing for divorce and was also staking a claim on our house and joint assets. He had twisted the narrative, painting himself as the victim of an absentee wife who had sabotaged his family's important events. "What does it say?" my mom asked, sensing my unease. "He's filed for divorce. He's also trying to take the house," I said, barely holding back tears. My mom squeezed my hand. Houses can be won or lost, but dignity, once gone, is hard to reclaim. You did the right thing coming here. Never doubt that. That night, after my mom had drifted off to sleep, I called my lawyer and briefed him about the situation. "Don't worry, Eva," he assured me. "Mark's unemployment will play against him in court. It's unlikely he can afford a lawyer strong enough to challenge you. We'll fight this." Feeling a little reassured, I tried to refocus on my mother. 2 days later, she passed away. Her final moments were peaceful, and she left knowing she was loved. That gave me a semblance of comfort amid the grief. After the funeral, I returned to what used to be our home. Mark had moved out, leaving the space hollow and devoid of warmth. But it was also devoid of tension, arguments, and the stifling atmosphere that had choked me for years. The legal proceedings began soon after. Mark had managed to scrape together enough for legal counsel, but it was apparent his resources were limited. My lawyer was true to his word. He presented a robust case. It wasn't just about assets or money, it was about basic human decency, respect, and the right to make choices about one's own family. Your Honor, my client rushed to her dying mother's bedside while dealing with threats and emotional blackmail from her then husband. She has been the primary earner and contributor to the joint assets, and it is only fair she retains possession of the house, my lawyer argued. Mark's lawyer fumbled, unable to paint his client as anything but the manipulator he was. When the judge ruled in my favor, declaring that the house would remain with me, I felt a finality not just to the court case, but to a chapter of my life that had caused so much pain. As I walked out of the courtroom, I finally felt the weight lifting off my shoulders. I had stood up for myself, for my mother, and for what was right, even when it was excruciatingly hard. The house would remain mine, but more importantly, my life was finally my own. And that's when it hit me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning a legal battle or safeguarding assets, it's reclaiming your life and living it on your own terms. As I drove back to my house, I realized this was just the beginning. For the first time in years, I was genuinely excited about what the future held. The moving truck pulled away, leaving me standing alone in front of the house that had seen so much. Joy, betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately, liberation. With Mark now completely out of my life and the divorce finalized, I had thought the home would feel emptier. Instead, it felt as if it had more space, like it could finally breathe. As I stepped inside, the absence of Mark's belongings was jarring, yet freeing. I wandered through the rooms, reclaiming them one by one, envisioning how I would redecorate, make them mine again. The doorbell rang. It was Sarah, my best friend, armed with wine and a toolkit. "Ready to reclaim your space?" she asked, a gleam in her eye. "You bet," I replied, letting her in. As we uncorked the wine and started taking down some of Mark's old, gloomy paintings, Sarah asked, "Have you spoken to him since the divorce was finalized?" "I have nothing left to say to him," I said firmly. "I think we've said all there is to say." "Good for you," she nodded approvingly. "And how are you feeling about all of this?" "I'm relieved it's over, and I'm excited to start fresh," I said, sipping my wine. "There's a lot to figure out, but I finally feel like I'm the one in control of my own life, you know?" We worked through the evening, laughing, sharing stories, and planning my new life. With every nail hammered and every piece of art replaced, it felt like I was nailing the lid on a past that had held me captive for too long. After Sarah left, I sat alone in my reclaimed living room, now filled with colors and artwork that reflected me, not a relationship that was never what it seemed. It was then that my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Mark. "I hope you're happy with your victory. You'll regret this," it read. I stared at the screen for a long moment, contemplating how to respond, if at all. Then, I remembered what my mother had told me in the hospital. Dignity, once gone, is hard to reclaim. I deleted the message, blocked his number, and set the phone down. It was a small act, but it felt like the closing ceremony of